5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
All right, boys. Podcast number 13 is going to go down for the second time.
Round 2.
Same
this is
with
13.5 then, or 13.1.
Yeah, this is a new and improved.
This happened to me just a couple of weeks ago where I forgot to turn the sound on. So thank you guys for coming back. So both these guys have been on the podcast before. Mike?
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I was here not too long ago. Locals Only Podcast is a podcast that I do. And like I was saying before, you know, the learning curve has been fun. It's been cool doing this and doing it with you and just meeting other people. Shout out to Inappropriality because I was on their podcast as well. And it's really awesome to see how other people do it because that's part of learning.
That.
Yeah, that was fun. It's really just interesting. You know, some people have studios, some people make their studio. Like this is awesome what you did with this place. Last time I was here, it's like 100% different.
It's getting there. It's slowly but surely. But one of the things is, like internally, I want this thing to go so much faster.
Yeah. But
of course, there's money involved, and I want to do things the right way.
Right.
So we have some new posters up, but they were supposed to be 2 more that are already supposed to be here, but because we're dealing with the holiday weekend and stuff like that, they were held. But hopefully today or tomorrow they'll get here, and we have the Godfather coming. We got Jimi Hendrix coming, and then we got my boy Christopher Walken.
There he is.
That's my guy right there. Well, that's probably the worst impersonation.
Oh, was it? Oh God, I'm trying to think. It was a bucket of cream. No, bucket of ice. What did he say in Catch Me If You Can?
Oh God, I don't remember.
This is mice.
I mean, for him, his whole career has turned into I need more cowbell.
Yeah. That too.
Like, that is pretty much everything that encapsulates his whole career.
I'll stab you in the face with a soldering iron.
He's got a whole career. He's got movies that I didn't even know he was in, and all of a sudden, need more cowbell.
My favorite one,
got the tongue
one of my
all
favorite
wrong.
ones was when he played in True Romance, and he sat down the kid's father, and they start going back and forth. That was insane.
I don't think I saw that one.
You'll have to watch the. I'll send you the video of it. The that particular scene. It's pretty intense, and
I love Christopher Walken.
Yeah, and you know Jimi Hendrix was I tried to make them all like kind of personal to me, although I want to try to find a Lauryn Hill one, which I found a couple, but they're not Amazon Prime. And if you look at where you get them from, they were just a bunch of letters.
Yep.
So we're not doing that because that's probably how I'm going to get my credit card hacked. So my other guest today is Matt Herring.
Yes, hey.
And so let him know about your podcast.
So I do a twice monthly show called the Power Chords Podcast, where my friend Brian Latendry and I talk about new music. We each review an album, whether it's a brand new one. We just recorded this morning. He talked about the new Miley Cyrus, because it has a very 80s influence to it. We don't normally talk about Disney
Did she
people.
just put something out?
Yeah, brand new album. And
no kidding.
It's like, wow, this is kind of good.
Yeah.
And then I talked about Peter Frampton. So we basically brought an album from the 70s to today. And then we talked about basically our favorite albums coming up, what we're looking forward to for 2021. But for the most part, the show is us each reviewing an album. Then we do news, and then we'll do an interview. I do 1,000 million interviews a week. And it's funny, you were talking about I'm looking over at your board and just amazed. When I do an interview, I take my phone, I call them, I flip it, I'll lean it against something, and then I'll get my hand mic and just do that. And the reason, people are like, it sounds really cool, but maybe it could be a little more high tech. And my whole thing is I want to make, the Radio Eclectic is the other show that I do. I want these shows to kind of reflect the old radio I used to listen to in the 80s.
Sure.
And I want it to sound like a literal call-in. And I have to go in and edit because it's funny how I'm not a tech guy, but you notice all those little things when you're watching the little bar go through, where when you take the mic from your mouth and put it down here, you get a little bit of a resistance. So you have to edit that out.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
Yeah.
So you go in and do
So
that.
I will edit that part out so you don't hear the fumbling too.
Right.
So tell me about the new album. As I get the mic down there.
Yeah.
And then I do, so that was 2. Yeah, so I do that. Then I work for the band Stryper, and I do their official podcast. So that's about a monthly show every other month. depending on time, depending on everything else, depending on what news they've got going on. When I started doing the podcast for them, it was interesting because there was a point where they almost broke up. And I'm like, oh, this is great. So what am I supposed to do a podcast for? And then all of a sudden, new album. So then it kind of gives you a chance to, talk about something for a little while. So I'm really at the mercy of, I'm like a movie theater. I'm at the mercy of the product being put out by people.
Yeah.
And if it's not good, I'm in trouble. If it's great, I have a lot of fun.
Well, that's making it your own podcast. It's such a process because my mind doesn't shut off about the podcast, and I'm sure you guys have the same issue. Like when I come down here now, it's finally starting to feel like it's mine. And I do have a permanent guest now, co-host. His name is Matt Griffin. Matt,
I saw that. Yeah, that's perfect. Isn't
Matt,
it so much nicer to have like a co-host?
You need that.
It's so important. It's so important. Shout out to all my co-hosts, by the way. It's freaking everything. The show wouldn't be the show without it.
They do make everything
Absolutely.
a lot more easier, and it's nice to have that person you can vibe off of.
Exactly.
We've been friends since we were kids, so it really to have him with me every week, and he couldn't make it here today.
Well, there's no better way to supplement the conversation than with just more people adding to it.
And
Right.
it takes the pressure off of you because you're not looking going, all right, I got nothing else to say. What do I got to do?
Yeah.
The camera's still rolling. I paid for 4 hours of video.
Yeah.
Right? It's a tough thing. And that's where I really enjoy both sides of it. Like I do the Striper one and the Radio Eclectic by myself. And I enjoy that. I enjoy it's my sandbox. I could do what I want.
Yep.
And then with Power Chords, I have to do it with my friend Brian. I don't say have to. That's kind of the wrong words. But we are so like-minded. I think we've had 2 arguments in about 15 years of working together on podcasts. And that's not bad. That's
Pretty good.
I mean, that would be,
Yeah.
I think I had 2 arguments with my wife on the way out of the house today. One was about this. So,
she didn't like the color?
well, she wanted this one on, not the one I picked out.
Oh, okay.
And she told me not to mention this, so it's going to be edited. Wink, wink.
Now you're in
The
trouble.
secrets of the Herring House. So I enjoy it. Like, I love working and basically saying, okay, you edit this. Here you go. Have fun. Knock yourself out. And then I have to do it with mine. So when I started doing shows by myself, I really started to appreciate all the work that he does as far as the editing, the production, and the hosting, and all of that stuff, because there's a whole process. Once you record, you're only half done.
That sometimes editing can take me. I use DaVinci to do my editing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot.
Video editing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I drop all my sound. I can video and audio edit at the same time. So DaVinci puts things in buckets.
Right.
And then so you just start from left to right, and then you can clean up everything as you go along. So when you get to the last bucket, that's when you render it, and you can see how
Yeah.
everything is. Rendering is kind of weird sometimes on this because I'll render it, and then all of a sudden I'll go try to find the file, and it's not there.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another thing like people don't understand. For, let's say it's an hour for the podcast, right? That means I'm looking at about 2 hours or more
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
per hour of editing. That's if everything goes right.
Right. Yeah, I know. That's why it's a couple things. I mean, one, do you do your own post?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something all 3 of us are in the same boat with that. And I'm thinking to myself now in this conversation, like I was, in one instance, I wish I didn't have to do it, but in another, I definitely love doing posts. But it's just doing it is so, you make mental notes of what happens during the podcast, and there's no way out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those can bog you down from contributing to the conversation when you
Right.
realize something happened, or, oh, this person's being too quiet. Like I've had people who have been, actively whispering.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do I say speak up
Yeah.
without sounding like an asshole?
But I think you
but
do it right, though.
But you
It's-
can just do it in post. So I try not to.
I just tell people straight up, like, hey, just got to push that closer.
Yeah.
Or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people respond well to that because with you guys coming here today, I think I expressed that this is such a, like, I don't have
Everybody
to go
knows
over.
what's happening.
Yeah.
Everybody knows how a microphone works.
And,
Yeah.
one of the good things for what I do is I record it in little, like, segments. I used to do the full hour and a half and then go back and edit. And I use Audacity. I still use Audacity because it's just easier. I'm not ready for a learning curve, and it's only audio. And I've had times where I will lose everything. and you
Ooh.
cannot figure out why, where, and how it happened.
Yeah.
So now what I
Wow.
do just to avoid that is I will record a 5-minute segment. It's basically my show. The Radio Eclectic is me playing DJ. So it's here's the song I'm going to play. I'm going to talk about it going into the song and play the song. That's about a 5, 6 minute, 7-minute clip. So I can go in and edit that and then be done with it and put it away and then piece it all together afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of I just edited for 4 hours and I lost everything, because that's happened to me a
that
couple
sucks.
times. And there's nothing worse than that. And people,
What depth do you go into when you edit for that long?
I'm
do you,
basically
do you sound engineer the entire wavelength?
it's mostly like I'm editing as I go. I basically re-listen to everything I just did.
Oh my god!
And then I am chopping everything out. That's why I will look at it, and the way my brain works is, okay, I just recorded 10 minutes. I put the song in, edit it, or put it together. Now I'm going to go in and edit it. So I have about another 20 minutes, and I can work better with that. Like, okay, it took me an hour, maybe 45 minutes to an hour to do a 10-minute segment, as opposed to, all right, it's going to take me 4 hours to do an hour.
yeah,
Like, I can break off those things, because I now have been doing where I walk in the house, I record a 5-minute segment, and then go back upstairs. Like, I go, because the way my house is,
yeah,
I come in, I record, and then I'll go upstairs, and now I'll start my life
right.
of being at home.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I've started to do it. Now I'm having another job shift.
What do you mean by record? Like,
I'll literally walk in and just record a 5-minute segment.
I'll start talking.
Yep.
And, I got you.
Like, I'll pop it in.
So
I'll
you
have
do it
my
by
notes.
yourself.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll have
okay.
my notes ready. It'll be whatever song I'm going to play. Like, I'll listen to it for a couple times, or I won't listen to it. I'll play it and then make my comments afterwards.
Gotcha.
So most of the time, I've already thought out. I have my little notes of what I'm going to say, what I need to talk about, and it's little blurbs. And a lot of times, I do better if you threw the song in front of me and let me know who the people were. I probably would do a lot better with less edits than the actual sitting down and thinking about it.
Yeah.
Which that doesn't work in every other facet of my life, but there it does.
Right.
Yeah. It's my problem too is I become obsessed with technology now.
Yeah.
I always have. Now I got to learn. Like when I got this new the Rode Podcaster Pro, this took a little bit of pressure off me when it came to I got to learn everything. And
Right.
we talked about having help on the podcast because that help really does go a long way. And when I lost my help, I had to resort to going back to stage one again. Like, okay, I got to figure this out. And
well, that's just it too. And it's a funny thing because when you're making something or doing something, often people don't realize how serious you are. You know what I mean? Like if Joe Rogan asked, Justin, hey, you want to? Who's gonna say no?
right,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because the work is done. So oftentimes people don't know the value of doing something because it hasn't proven itself yet.
right,
And so that can be a difficult part, and at least a part that I recognize as far as what you're saying in it is that people will be like, oh, right now it's the setup I have is pretty great, but what I'm saying is that there's just so much that can come out of a podcast.
right.
Because I mean, however your method is of making the podcast, it's a very natural thing to do. You're just having conversations with people. So at that point, no matter, it's only a matter of time before you have enough good conversations with the right people, before a lot of people are kind of valuing that form of content, you know?
So the purpose of our podcast today is we're going to talk about how do we get people to come on our podcast and how do we get people to support what we're doing?
Yeah.
Because there's a fear.
Oh, there is a huge fear. It's the red light syndrome.
Yeah.
You had back in the old days when I started out in radio in the 80s, and it was a lot different. We were playing actual 45s, queuing up the records, and all that good stuff right there. But when you were doing that, as soon as you flipped the mic on, there was a light that went on that said on air. And you would have that little bit of a, and in my case, it was like, oh my God, there's like 11 people in Northampton listening to me right now. And that's kind of where your thought went. But you start to realize nowadays, especially with this technology and how podcasting has replaced radio for everything that you could imagine. There is a podcast version of what you loved on the radio. And when you put this all together and you start doing things like this, you realize, first of all, how easy it is. And then the second thing, and I think I learned this really early on because I do a lot of, I'll do panels at comic book shows. I wrote a Doctor Who book, so I do tons of Doctor Who panels. I'll do panels on how to write books, how to do a podcast. And once you get out of your own head that every single person is hinging on every word you say, you're fine, because you know what? Nobody is. I may stumble on a word and I'll sit there and be like, oh, I got to go back and edit that. And I'll find the and keep going back and forth and chop it out.
Yeah.
Nobody's even going to care. Nobody would care if I even burped. I mean, they'd probably be shocked, but people are not as... They're not hinging. Their lives aren't hinging on everything we
Right. In
say.
other words, you're far more particular about yourself
Absolutely.
and self-conscious than anybody else would be for you.
And
Sure.
I also understand, too, that with like the Radio Eclectic, and I joke around about this with probably every show, I know people aren't tuning in to listen to me. Like they may, I might have gotten them there, but they're not going, oh, my God, what is Matt going to say? And then they're going to turn down the music. It's the opposite. They're trying to fast forward to get to the new music to hear what this band is doing.
Yeah.
But see, I have a different spin on that. I definitely think that that's why they're there in the first place is you. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then they get into the music. But I think you bring that personality to the podcast. You bring that experience. And then the music is just that icing on the cake. You know what I mean? So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about how when we give a compliment to somebody, we do that just pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
But it's genuine. We mean it. But when we receive a compliment, we're like, whoa, it doesn't feel right? It's like, it feels awkward.
Well, it is. It's funny. It's tough to accept a compliment, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't do either one very well. I get as nervous with if you're going to say anything negative, just don't even say it.
Right.
Like, hey, I want to comment on your show. You know what? Don't. Just don't.
That's one thing I took from Joe Rogan right away was don't look at the comments. Even though I appreciate the comments, I'm not going to get wrapped up in the comments because I'm sure at one time or another, as this podcast gets better.
There's a halfway point where right now, for instance, like myself and you, there's not really that many comments. There's some, but it's not going to be devastating. But once you start getting into those, we'll say hundreds or low thousands subscribers, you can start getting just enough to be able to pay attention, because obviously somebody like Joe Rogan's podcast, that's millions of comments, on his posts, or at least tens of thousands, right? Probably not millions of comments, but millions of views, tens of thousands of comments, and a lot of them could be extremely negative. Like most of the time, you're not going to say something really nice. You'll just be like, I really enjoyed that, and walk away. Yeah. Somebody who really hates it will always tell you that.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
They'll tell you why in every different way they possibly can.
Yeah. And if you take that personal, you might not get up in the next, you might stay in bed for a couple more hours.
That was a big thing for me to get out of, because I don't take criticism very well. I never have.
Yeah.
I am the most insecure person you'll ever meet, and I play it off really well. I come across a lot more confident than I am.
Yeah.
I remember talking to somebody. I did a Doctor Who panel at a comic show 2 years ago. There's like 500 people. The room had a 500 capacity. Every chair was full, and there were people lined up on the side watching. So I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And then in my head, I'm like, I'm walking off stage after I finished and going, I freaking sucked. I was like, I start beating myself. I start ripping myself apart, but then I'll jump back in the next time to do it. And people have come up and said like, oh, maybe I didn't like that or something like that. But I've never done well with criticism. I don't do well with positive feedback. Any feedback. If it has feedback in it, I'd rather.
Really? Why do you think that is?
My parents are always like, what the hell did we do to you?
Yeah.
What did we do to you that made
I like
you
positive
like that?
feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an easy like, thanks.
I think a lot of where my issues come from with a lot of this stuff is, as a young kid, I was really shy. I stuttered when I was younger. I still have a tendency sometimes when I start thinking too far ahead, I'll start to stutter, and then I am like falling apart inside.
That's me.
Going, oh my gosh, I'm like, Maddie in third grade on the playground and not wanting to talk. But even though I had all those fears, I wanted to be in the spotlight.
Right.
So what does somebody like, I'm in high school and then it's like, well, what do I do to avoid the spotlight? You know what? I'm going to be in a band. I'm going to be a singer in a band. And everybody's looking at you. Nobody's looking at the bass player. Nobody's looking at the drummer.
Right.
And that was where I became an alcoholic because I could not handle,
Like legitimately for a little bit?
I couldn't handle the position I put myself in and couldn't handle the pressures that went around it. And most of the pressures were all self-made. It wasn't, we were a local band. It wasn't like, we had to get an album out and save, I had to go save a little girl's life with a song. Nobody cared.
Right.
Yeah,
it was all the pressure I put on myself.
That's a great point, though. Like, we do that a lot as individuals. And, like, I always talk about perception and reality.
Oh, yeah.
And, my perception was when I first started this, who's going to watch it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Then you go back and you look at all the views. Now, some of these views, they're not a lot. But if you look at the combined total, I think it's like almost 1,000 hours or something.
Yeah.
It can't be that much, but it's a lot more than I would ever have thought people would,
Yeah.
So I'm part of the comments. I want to hear, what do you guys want to hear?
Right.
You know what I mean?
I wish I got more of that myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been pretty easy to fill in for that. But off of what you were saying, what was it?
Putting the pressure on.
Putting the pressure on. Now, is that typically like, are you having trouble being in the moment sometimes when you're doing this?
I don't know, because it's funny. I still play sports.
Yeah.
So when I'm playing softball, all the pressure's on me. Like I've got scouts.
Yeah.
Like the Nationals have a scout and they're watching me. I'm a 52-year-old freaking softball player paying to play. There's no pressure. There is no pressure. We don't have enough guys in the outfield, so there's no pressure.
Yeah.
Same with hockey. Same with at work. Like my goal is to be the number one safety specialist in my region. That's my whole goal. And getting there, it's like I do it strictly because I don't want anybody to think negative. I don't know. It's my brain plays a lot of weird tricks, and for the most part, it works. Like I'm able to work it into something. It's like with my OCD. Like I'm very OCD with organizing and things like that. I got a bug flying around me.
Yeah.
I make it work where other people just kind of fall into it and cave in.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been able to take a lot of those my little quirks and weirdnesses and definitely work it to my advantage.
Yeah.
Which is what you have to do. And, anytime, like I was thinking about this too, like when you're talking about, people canceling out, I will say this, a lot of the musicians that I interview, and I probably interview 6, 7, 8 musicians a month, any of the comic book stuff I did, these guys go into it being nervous about doing interviews. Even though, a good friend of mine, Jim Peterick, who was a keyboard player for Survivor. Now, he co-wrote Eye of the Tiger. He co-wrote the song Vehicle, if you remember Vehicle from the 70s. Mm-hmm. This guy has made so much money from just those 2 songs.
Push it a little bit more.
And more?
Yeah, you're going off
Oh,
camera
me?
just a little bit. Yeah.
I'm going off the deep end. Yeah, let me come in a little bit more. So that's the fun of audio. Or I should have gone. I should have went like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that to me. I'm out of here. But Jim is one of those guys that he gets nervous before he does interviews. And this is somebody that doesn't have to. And you would also think, however many interviews he's ever done in his life, he would be fine with it.
And that's kind of like the secret to a podcast, is that it is an interview in a sense, if you want it to be, but it's more than an interview. It's actually less of an interview, more of a conversation. Yeah. And that, I think, shows a lot of people more of that person's true colors, because that's the whole point of an interview, is to get to know somebody and get the audience to know that somebody. But it's very difficult to get to know somebody when you have these rigid guidelines. Hey, what is your favorite food? What do you do on Sunday? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't tell you anything about somebody. That just tells you about what, these trivial bullshit. That's pretty much what it is. But when you get to not look, because if it's just audio, but you get to experience what that person how that person reacts to a question or reacts to a series of conversations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that it gives them, paints a much better picture.
Yeah. Like with my last guest, we did a whole bunch of questions, right? I try to new things all the time, and one of them was, what would you eat for your last meal? And it was interesting because I think she said steak or something.
Yeah.
And then she went with a salad. And I'm like, whoa, salad? You know what I mean? So those are the funny things I think that we can add in and kind of spice it up a little bit. Like I have a whole list of questions, and I'm curious to find out, because I think it goes with people's how they are.
Yeah.
You know, you get to find some interesting stuff, like our wheel that we're going to do in a few minutes.
Yeah.
That can get really interesting. You know, so having different segments of the podcast is what I'm trying to work on next, where we can break it up just a little bit so they don't feel like it's an interview.
Yeah.
Because it's, like you said, it's really not.
No.
It's the art of conversation.
Just having, exactly. And my take on the question you had asked previously was, you know, how do you make the process of asking somebody and them coming in to the podcast?
Yeah, so let's talk about that fear that they have. So
Right.
what we're talking about is when we initially approach somebody to come on the podcast.
Right, or apprehension.
Right.
Because what I think a lot of the times it comes down to is them knowing exactly what you're doing. I find it helps in my mind when you're just constructing what it is that is your podcast, is like you said, you do twice a month. People can count on that.
Yeah.
It's so important for consistency. I think your wife had reached out to me, and I had told her a small bit of information that I had gotten from Gary Vaynerchuk, if you guys are familiar with. He's an entrepreneur.
Yep.
And he's big into all social medias. He's a big directory guy, meaning like you can find him anywhere. You type in his name, any platform that's a platform, you'll find him. And what it comes down to is that consistency and the timing of which you can produce something is objective. The quality is subjective. So it's important for just one little key fact is not to focus so much on the quality, because the quality is, if you worry about it, that's when it starts to diminish. You know, the degree at which you want something is usually the degree at which you cannot have it. And if it's you want quality, like, you're just focused, you can't be in the moment, you can't produce something that's of what you are, right, of what you're really trying to do. But furthermore, when it comes down to, hey, you reach out to me, I've never met you in my life. If you reached out to me as Jeff Plouffe and you say, hey, I got this podcast, I'd love to interview you, Mike, the first thing I would do is check Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, right? If there isn't some type of substantial, I mean, it helps if you're on all three always. That's what I'm getting to, is the directories. If there seems to be any kind of buzz around it, there's an actual momentum around it. That's kind of how this age of attention or attention economy is functioning. So if somebody wants to go on a show, it helps to see what the show is in its entirety easily. So the beauty is that you have many different large platform directories in which you can talk about this or show some of your content and be like, ooh, I would like to be a part of that. But obviously the downside is that there's massive competition. But it's not the competition you need to worry about, because, you shouldn't worry about it, because that's essentially what would impair you the most. Because right now, why it's an attention economy is because we live in a really weird day and age. And this has probably been a crazy transition for you, because you've been doing this for as long as you have. Because back when I was using a computer and back when you were starting to do podcasts, it probably wasn't as much the case. You know, we were, at least for me, because I'm 28, not the oldest, but my point is, when I was using YouTube, just like you for the first time, there was no ads. It was just this sandbox of wormholes and conspiracies and dogs or whatever it was that was on there in abundance.
Music videos that I hadn't seen since 1985.
Yeah. So my point is, now all of a sudden we live in a day and age when there's more information than there is audience. And that's what makes obviously audience in demand. And so when you're trying to get somebody on there, you want people to feel confident that there's a show behind what you're doing, right? You know, and that's, I think, just so branding, marketing, that kind of has something. People talk to me a lot about it. I don't think branding and like the logo and the name are as important as the product itself. Yeah. So it's just accessibility, those types of things, being very transparent and excited about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just always open-ended, because even if they say no, you go, well, just let me know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just nothing off your back, because it has to be. because it's totally somebody's prerogative to come on here, and it's one thing you find even when you do make a podcast is that sometimes they don't even want to share it or watch it because a lot of the times people are ashamed. Like you said, spotlight syndrome kicks in, and you all of a sudden realize that you have a lot of awkward things about yourself, but you're the only one focusing on those things, especially when you're watching yourself or listening to yourself for the first time.
Yeah.
So there's a double layer to that fear that a guest might have is coming on and then being on.
Yeah.
Because with a podcast, and you probably found this to be true, like why it's so important you get an artist on. They might share it. There's their audience now tuning into your, and that's the beauty of a podcast is that you have the power, the full power of networking, because every time you put out a new episode, it's an entirely new audience tuning in.
Yep. Right. It's every time somebody watches or listens, it's somebody's first episode.
Yeah.
Every time. That's something that I've had to think about, had to work on. The advantage I have is probably more over you guys is when I have somebody coming on, they're trying to sell something. So they, like the record labels are going, okay, you've got a new album coming out, so you got to do the media circle now. And you've got to get out there and talk to everybody. And it's really, for me, having the record labels, the agents, the bands, all reaching out to me has been huge. To me, that just validates what I do, that they're giving me their product. Like this band, this artist has worked a year, 2 years on an album, and they think enough of me to review it. They think enough of me to play something on it. And I have no, I guess, journalistic integrity. Is that the right word? If I don't like something, I'm just not going to play it. I'm not going to bash it. I'm not going to say anything.
That would mean you probably do have the integrity.
Probably a little more,
it's you wouldn't just because it's a band. Okay, sure, just come on.
Yeah, like if I don't like it, I'm not going to play it. And that's where like a lot of times you get the people that are like, hey, this band is doing this. Like I've worked with a couple bands where one band is members, but there's another band of the same name out there, and they're now fighting for the name in court. And I had the band that was sort of the second tier of the bands, and people are like, why are you interviewing this guy? He's a fake. He's a fraud. I'm like, he's got to make a living. And right now the court says he can still do what he's doing. So why not give it the attention? And that's been a big thing lately. My book about Black Sabbath, if you go on any Black Sabbath, like their official website, Black Sabbath basically has wiped out their entire history from 1979 to 2010 because they want to just focus on the Ozzy Osbourne-led Black Sabbath. For me, that is such an injustice because you have now taken away 4 different singers that have all done something that touched me in one way or another.
We did. Yep.
And the band Asia was another one. When I did the book, I didn't focus on the guy who came in afterwards, and I really regret that. That's why I'm going to redo that book because, again, yes.
Talk about, though, for a second how important you're talking journalism.
Yeah.
How important that is, because I find, and this might help you out too, and I'm a terrible reader. I have an attention span of a goldfish when it comes to reading, but I love writing. It's weird.
Yeah.
That was probably my strength in high school. But I found that it's very valuable when you have somebody on to have a very colorful description of who they are and what you talked about. And do you find that that's been something you kind of do a lot when somebody comes on to describe what happened, describe who they are, and
and you get that. Like a lot of times I've had musicians, I've had comic book creators when we were doing the old comic book podcast that would come in. You get some guys that are just fired up. It's all their personality. Like the job, what they do, we just assume because they are in the public arena that they're extroverts. Like, this guy's the lead singer of a band.
Not the case.
He's going to be the greatest
so not the
interview
case.
ever, and that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Yep.
I interviewed a couple people where it was so funny because the guy sent me a message going, oh my God, I heard the interview. I didn't sound half as stupid as I thought I did. And in my head, I'm thinking, I had to edit this thing a lot. Not that I'm being negative about it, because if you can take a 10-minute interview, edit out a lot of bleeps, and, brain farts and things like that, and you get a really good interview, that's the person.
Just a quick editing question. Do you go in and edit out ums?
If
like they go,
depends.
That's the worst.
Yeah, I don't know about
and how do you say, hey, you're saying a lot on air? You know, like
yeah, you don't. You don't.
I won't even edit. Like if I'm talking to somebody and they're on their cell phone and they go in the other room and I lose signal, I usually won't turn around and say, hey, can you go in the other room? I can't hear you. I'll just edit that whole part out.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like, I don't want to ruin the flow of what we're doing.
That's true.
The thing with ums is really weird because when I was in broadcasting school and when you're in radio, cardinal sin is dead air. You do not want dead air. So if you are looking for like your song, like, hey, coming up, we got the latest from Madonna, because you don't know the next thing that you're going to play or say, or you don't know the name of the song, instead of going, you got to fill that void because that quiet is
even doing that's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, you guys are all like, what's going on?
Yeah,
it is so uncomfortable. So we were kind of told, do the ums.
Yeah.
And then when I took the public speaking course, they're like, you don't say ums and you don't do-si-do. Well, I do all of that.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying as far as like a guest, I feel like it's pretty easy to not do them. But see,
I don't. Yeah.
Though
I don't even get wrapped up in
but
that.
I've like, because I'll go back. We were talking about post-production. I've got it down to the point where I don't go through the whole thing. I just trust the software, put it out, make sure that where I think it's quietest, I check to make sure it's audible, and where I think it's loudest, it's not too much clipping. Because sometimes it's almost impossible to avoid certain clipping depending on how, and it's like you want if unless you really go in and sound engineer it and just take that one part and bring it down. But I haven't actually done that, but you kind of inspired me too, though. When it comes down to like a conversation, if somebody gets really swinging with a like or an and it could be the whole conversation, like, and it's like, whoa.
I interviewing guys from California. There's a lot of that in there.
Yeah, and
a couple of the bands that I work with a lot. Members are from California, and they have that really, laid back, and that's them. Like, you don't want to cut a lot of that out, but you don't want to leave all of it in. I've got a couple of musicians that English is a second language, although they've been speaking English since they were 5. There's still a lot of things that come across in their vocal cadence that it's like, oh, I got to get rid of that. I got to chop that. So I think I look at it as, and it's easier for me, again, because it's audio, like you're not going to see a lot of jumps and if you guys are doing it, you're going to see this, and then you'll see me over here because you just chopped out a whole part.
That's what I was going to bring up. It's definitely more difficult to do it on the platform that we do it on.
Yes, there's certain very, very subtle fades. Like I've really botched saying somebody's name to the point where I couldn't deal with it.
Yeah. Oh, I've done that.
And so I just cut that introduction out.
Yep.
And went from there because I'm always most nervous in the first 5 minutes because again that video and the audio gets that, as you know, just there's a lot more awkwardness in the first 5 to 10 minutes than the rest of the podcast.
That's why I was watching something the other day about podcasting, and they said to let the guest introduce who they are.
Yeah.
So what it does is it helps them get over that fear that they initially have, or that,
Well, I like to say their name, and
I do the big build up.
I always say their name, like their first name, and then I say, "Why don't you introduce yourself?" So that gives them that mindset of, okay, once they get to talking, the fear kind of gets tucked away for a few minutes. And then, like you said, the first 10 minutes is the hardest. And then once the 10 minutes starts rolling back through, you can start seeing them kind of get relaxed in their chair a little bit, and so
alcohol helps sometimes or coffee.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing this at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So we're not messing around. We have our coffees this morning, but typically, and I'm not a big drinker. I know you're not.
I'm not either.
So I've had some drinks, but like for me, too many drinks, and then I can't concentrate because I don't drink at all usually. So then I start getting the brain fog, and then I'm looking through them, and I think it ruins.
It all depends on how healthy you got to really I'll do all right. If I got somebody coming in and they're gonna be like that, I'll be all right. I'm gonna do a run this morning just to make sure I'm cognitive because you got to make sure that you're there, mind, body, and soul.
Another tough thing that I have to deal with is, I have interviewed people that have been interviewed a million times already, and you don't want to always ask the same question.
Oh, yeah.
So I always try to find something. Like, I'm not good at cold interviews. If you said, hey, you got to interview this guy, lead singer of this band tomorrow, I know nothing about him. I can't do it. I have to have not tomorrow, like in 5 minutes. I have to have a lot of prep. I have to know what's going on
before you have somebody come in.
First of all, if I will never take an interview unless I can't say that because I've been taking a lot more lately because there's a lot of lot of new bands coming up where I don't know anything about these guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I will listen to the music, stuff like that. But like when I see an interview come through from a person that I have loved, it's like, oh, I've been doing this interview in my brain since 1985. I'm ready for this one. But you don't always want to ask the same questions. But if you do, you want to ask them in a different way.
Right.
Like for me, I always say, I know this is the easiest question to ask, but I'm interested. Who are the influences on you? Like when I interviewed the bass player for Megadeth, Dave Ellefson, I was saying, what was it that made you listen to something? What were you listening to that made you say, I want to play that, but heavier and faster? So it's kind of asking the same question because I basically ask questions I want to ask.
Right.
I'm never asking anything that if somebody says like, oh, you want to ask them about this, and I've never thought about it, that's something pretty interesting. But I really go in as prepped as I can be with who the person is. I have questions written, but the only one in stone are the first two. Because then I'll let the conversation.
How far does it go with your questions? Right. Do you just start to then have a conversation?
I've had interviews where I remember interviewing when I was doing the comic book thing. I interviewed a young girl who was in a Doctor Who episode, Caitlin Blackwood, and she played little Amelia Pond. And if any Doctor Who fans are watching, they're going to go, oh, I know who that little girl is. So I remember I hooked up the interview. I got with her mom because she was like 11. So I'm like, well, I want to do the interview, but I want you there. So we sat there and, it's like, so what was it like seeing yourself on TV for the first time? It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
no way.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
That's all you hear.
Yeah.
So it was literally 10 minutes of that. Every question was answered like that. And she's a young girl. That's what you should have, raising young girls. You're either very quiet or you're over talkative, and she just happened to be very quiet. And every question was that answer. I remember asking the question to her about, so what was the whole process of how you got on the show? Did you have to do auditions? Was it scary to go in and have to play somebody different for people you didn't know? Oh no, Matt Smith is my uncle. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then I remember getting all
Isn't
done
that
with
funny
that.
how perspective just like can be, or rather how your perspective was acquired can be so detrimental to your character. Because if, like you said, most people, if you're asking them, how'd you score that part in that role in this production, and it was my uncle.
Yeah.
And it
wasn't
went
Matt
from
Smith.
all this content to
and I have to say, it wasn't Matt
building
Smith, the
imploding.
doctor, who was her uncle. It was Karen Gillian, who she was playing the young version of. It was her aunt.
Okay.
Which was a huge reason she got it, because she looked like her, but a younger version.
Yeah.
And I remember after the interview, I was sitting there. I must have been sweating bullets. There was also like 80 to 100 people all circled around watching this interview. And I got up and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. This was brutal. And her mother came over and gave me a hug and said, oh my God, that was amazing. And I'm like, really? She goes, she really opened up to you. And I'm like, does she talk?
Yeah,
Because
what is she normally like?
yeah, and she was just a sweet kid who was brand new to this whole thing. And that was and I say it was one of the most uncomfortable, not because of her, but because of just the situation. And I've heard interviews with her since, and but it was basically too, she was also jet lagged. She just flew over, never been to America, never been to New York. So she was like, her and her mom were just walking New York all night long. So I also got this young girl that was half asleep.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there was a lot of negatives, but it really turned out to not only be just a fun interview afterwards, but a really good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes that when people do that, that's different, obviously, because she's younger and just in the beginning of her life. And when you're that young, you don't establish much of sense of gratitude yet.
No.
And it's not, I don't think it's by any means malevolent or on purpose. It's just, how do you know?
Just life.
You've been
Life.
on the planet for 10 years.
Yeah.
And like 5 of them were adolescents. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you were just like, not even adolescents. I mean, mindless. Because
Two of them,
right.
you were laying in a crib just
You-
looking
you
up,
were-
hoping somebody feeds you.
right, you're
Yeah.
testing out physics at that point.
Yeah.
Like that's it for 5 years, and then you kind of get it. All right, don't bonk my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when we approach somebody, because I think it's really important that we get to a point in the podcast where we let people know what it's going to be like being on a podcast. So that'll help alleviate some of the stress that they have when we first approach them. because I can tell you, I mean, you guys can attest to this. Like, I'll meet somebody new for the first time, and they hear I do a podcast. They're like, "Oh, you do a podcast?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, well, you want to be on?" Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
you know,
Or they go, yeah. And then when you ask them later, they go, no.
yeah, and how to get through that to let them know that this is actually fun. It's it doesn't have to be stressful, and you know, everybody's interesting. As much people say, I'm not an interesting person, and I always say hogwash with that because you are very interesting.
Everybody's got a story.
Yeah, and you're actually doing a podcast with a lot of people without even doing a podcast. If you think about it, take the camera and the microphone away, and you're doing exactly
I
what
feel
we
that
would
way.
do here.
I feel that way about a lot of conversations I have in life. And that's kind of why I decided to do a podcast myself, is because I love having great conversations. You know, how great would it be to share this is kind of where I was thinking.
Yep.
And I think a big thing with you is if either one of you, if you're asking somebody, then you think that they're interesting enough.
Absolutely.
Like, you wouldn't just go up to anybody that you met. Like, you know, if we're in a social situation, like when we were at that Halloween party where they were throwing furniture in a fire, there was a few
party.
people that,
We were.
That was interesting. If you're asking, like, if you're looking around that room of that group of people, there were 4 or 5 of the 10 or 12 that you would probably want to have on the show. The rest, no.
Sure.
You're not going to, and it's no fault of theirs, but you're not going to ask anybody. You're not going to just go, oh, I do a podcast. You want to be on it? I know nothing about you. If you're asking, there's something I want. There's something I'm interested in.
Right.
There's something I think everybody else would be interested in.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess sometimes building up on that part of, you know, hey, if I'm asking, I see something.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm going to incorporate when I meet somebody, and my goal is to get them on the podcast, and we've been doing this at work, I'm going to send them a Survey Monkey to fill out. And basically, it's going to say the same thing. So it's going to be, I find you interesting, and then I'm going to ask a list of questions like, what are your reservations about coming on the podcast? What are some of the topics you think you would like to discuss? You know, so it gives me kind of like a snapshot of who they are, kind of where they are mentally on the podcast, and that'll help me. So what I do now is I'm going to take those questions, I'm going to kind of compile it, and then I'm going to call them back live and say, okay, these are the things that you wrote down. Let's talk about some of these. So they have a more of a picture of what this is going to look like when we sit down. And I'm hoping that's going to...
Trial and error with that kind of stuff is so important.
Yeah.
Because it might define, again, how you get people in here. I think a big thing that I've found works really well is understanding your value. You know what I mean? Like when I was saying, being very colorful about how you approach somebody. You know, you're not lying when you say, yeah, let's talk. Let's get what you do out there. Let's talk about what you do and see. You know, I think there's a lot that people can learn from you. You know what I mean? Because a big part of it. And I've been fortunate enough to, it's been my actual job. My day job has been a trainer, as you know, a personal trainer. And the underlying momentum of that job or that career is just being a motivator. Right. So when you can motivate somebody at all, you can indirectly get them jazzed up about anything.
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't, because again, it's like, okay, I want them on the show, but fuck the show.
Yeah.
Who are you? And man, this is awesome. What you do is sick. This is great. Hey, do you want to talk about, like, that kind of stuff can be like, no, people then don't think about it as the show. They think about it now as an opportunity to accentuate who they are on a free conversation platform, you know?
Let people know too that, you know, oh, I'm too nervous. Every time I put the mic on, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
So
they always think like we're not nervous.
Oh, yeah.
And there is I get nervous all the way until the time I sit down because I have certain things I need to make sure it gets done.
Being the producer and the host, that's kind of what I was going to, is like, I love producing, like editing videos, creating content. All those things are very fun to me. But it is tough to also be the host because unlike us, we don't all have a young Jamie Do, if I'm referring to Joe Rogan's podcast. You're familiar with Joe Rogan's podcast, of course?
Somewhat.
Yeah, somewhat.
I know who he is.
Yeah.
I remember him back when he was a young stand-up comedian and he was on talk radio. And then
Fear
all of
Factor.
a sudden, and then all of a sudden he's on Fear Factor now, and then look at him now.
Yeah, I know. Well, his podcast is a long way. If you want inspiration, ladies and gentlemen, if you are doing anything, and if you were to critique something on the degree at which Joe Rogan started, his first podcast was trash.
Yeah.
It was just complete garbage. He was on webcam on his computer. It had like snowflake effect. I listened to 15 minutes of it. He He put on air 15 minutes of his setup. He wasn't even talking. He was like, all right, I think we're going here. You could hear a click, 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 here, click, click. And it was like him and I think Brian Redband just kind of looking at the mic. But my point is, where was I going with that? So what was I saying? Essentially with I lost my train of thought.
About motivating.
Motivate progression.
Yeah, progressing, motivating people. I thought I was going somewhere else with that. I lose my train of thought all the time. Oh, no, being a host and a producer, we don't all have the luxury of having a young Jamie do, because imagine if all you had to do was sit down and talk.
Yeah.
You have to worry about that camera being on, maybe that one being on. That usually is something that takes place behind. And I think it is a better, because, again, decentralized command always beats out centralized command when it comes to small operations and even larger operations sometimes.
Right.
And that's just so you have the peace of mind to do exactly what it is that needs to be done in that instance.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point, too. All the famous people that you've interviewed, and you still get nervous.
Yeah.
You know, there's still some nervousness on their part.
Yeah.
So I think telling people that's okay, and that's what I always tell them. Why don't you go back and watch some of the podcasts so you get a little familiarize yourself on what we're going to be talking about. And it's your story. So, you know, everybody has their own story. So that's where the fascination comes from.
Right. No hesitation. You have nothing to worry about, type of thing. You have nothing to worry about.
Yep.
It's gonna,
it's my show,
I need
right?
somebody to talk to. That's why I need you on the show.
Yeah.
That and the fact that people always look at, I can't talk for 2 hours. Well, you're not going to talk for 2 hours. That's not the way it's going to be. And you're going to look at the clock afterwards and go, holy cow, that went fast. It goes by quick.
It's how everybody says after the podcast is over. I go, we're about at 2 hours now. And they go, already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I'm going to try throwing out there is this is like me starting my own business, right? Even though I'm not getting paid a single penny. But
You're just seeing the money going out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want people to kind of more understand that if I opened up a restaurant, it'd be kind of cool if you came and ate at my restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting my own podcast. It'd be really cool if you support me and come to my podcast. It's just like running my own business.
Yep.
And I was like 3:00 in the morning the other night. I woke up and I'm like, I thought of that. I'm like, that's another way of saying it, know. And some people are like, oh, I want to support you in the same way. So hopefully that mindset, will get them to say.
And that's another thing too. Is it's important, in my opinion. That is, I've found I'm far more relaxed and confident in the process when I'm not thinking about it on a monetary from a monetary standpoint. And I know you're kind of the same way. This is something you just wanted to do. This is your hobby. This is fun. And we're so freaking fortunate that we live in a country where if you do something enough, you're going to be compensated some way or another. That's just how a good economy works. You can pull politics and all that aside. The point is that you can do anything enough and end up getting paid for it in some regard.
Yeah.
So it's so important if I right now pretending to talk to anybody who's thinking about doing something and getting themselves out into the world. It's not to think about that. It's to think about how much you love it and how important it is to you to do things that you love, Because if it's not important to do things that you love, then just wait around till you die, right? Do your job 9 to 5, and then the sun goes down about another trillion times, and then you die. Or keep doing the things you love and don't worry about the rest of it.
I talked to my daughters. My oldest daughter's a teacher, and I talked to her. I think they're 5th graders. Oh boy, I'm sorry if they're not. But the whole gist of why I talked to her students was, she goes, you have a job. What did you want to do when you were older, when you were younger? And I go, well, I wanted to be a pro baseball player, then a pro hockey player, then a rock star, and then a DJ. And she goes, so what are you doing now? And I go, well, I'm sort of DJing with the podcast, and I get to interact and hang out with people that I have loved for so long, people that have been on posters on my wall.
Yeah.
And she was explaining to the kids that just because you have a dream and you don't achieve it doesn't mean you can't have a fun life. And she was like, my dad has got the best life. He's always doing something fun.
You know what, too?
And that's a great way to look at it.
A really good, I love what you said there. A really good point is that I think, and perspective defines everything so much. And I think we've all been sort of fooled in a sense that all dreams need to be achieved. I think dreams are better to be understood as inspiration.
Yeah.
It's like, failure is so important, right? Because imagine, in other words, you understanding that you couldn't do those other things has led you to where you are now.
Yeah.
So
I love too, like
there's a lot of value in that.
We were just talking about, you were talking about you being a personal trainer.
Yeah.
And motivating. And you look at the podcast as like a motivation. Like you want your people, you
get people jazzed up.
Yeah.
You can really see it in their eyes. And,
Yeah.
and you can feel that. Like when people are like, you know what?
Yeah.
Oh my shit. I'm doing okay.
And Jeff is a business guy. You have a business mindset. So you look at this as, okay, if I'm a restaurant, I want you to come to my restaurant. So why would I not want you on my podcast? I have a marketing degree. My brain is in marketing. So that's the way I look at everything I do with my podcast. I am here to market the music, the musicians that are here, the music that is given to me, and then market myself. So we definitely are all taking our strengths and sort of our passions. And then also too, like we were talking about the monetary part, all of a sudden I started to realize that, tax-wise, you can write things off. Like for my book writing, I have like a separate business. So
like an LLC.
Yeah.
and
So in order to write music biographies, I need to be in tune with these musicians and what's going on. So I have to have, like you take your passion. Like I've got a friend who's a runner and loves to talk about it. I'm like, so do a podcast. And he's big into Seth Rogen too. I'm like, or Joe Rogan. Seth Rogen.
Well, Seth Rogen's
I'll listen to him
he's
too.
awesome too. Yeah.
I don't like
Seth Rogen.
You don't
If you
like
ever
Seth?
see this,
No. So take your passion and you can turn it into a business. Like you can start reaching out to companies and say, hey, I'm doing he's big into running. And I said, call a company and go, hey, I'm doing a running podcast. I'm trying to pick out my new shoes that I want to use. And if maybe you either give me a free pair or a discount, I will talk about however you've got to do that, work with it, because that's how you start getting something back. Like I think of the fact I haven't probably bought new music in probably 5 years.
Yeah.
Which sucks for the local record store in Enfield that I go to, because I'll go in there all the time and be like, I got to buy something because I'm not buying stuff. But what I'll do now is anytime I put a music show up, I'll post it on their Facebook page and say, hey, listen before you buy. Here's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
So you can always find ways to satisfy the financial part or the financial side of, like, you don't want to put a monetary value on what we're doing because you're making a penny an hour. If even that. You're seeing the money going right out the window. But to me, it really is gratifying that the labels and all these people are looking at me going, we believe in what you're doing, and so do these artists. So we want you to take our product for free and help push it. So to me, that's, come to a concert. Here's your ticket here's 2 tickets to a concert. You can go backstage and hang out. You can do interviews. You're in the photo pit. You're all this stuff that's like, okay, sure.
I will say on that regard that, and I've said this before in the beginning of when I started doing podcasts, is that the future, in my opinion, of advertisement. I mean, when was the last time you saw an ad and were like, oh, I should get that? Like the first thing I go is I fucking hate that. And I'll skip it. I won't even sometimes watch the video because it's like I don't got 15 seconds.
Yeah. Right.
Because this is 15 seconds of me going, do I really need to watch this and waste 10 minutes of whatever this headline was? Because I mean, again, it's all echo chamber. The system understands what you like, so it's kind of like you break out of that. Okay, I'm out of here. But on a podcast, when you're listening to something that's intriguing and stimulating natural and organic thought patterns in yourself and whoever's listening, is that you can talk about something very genuinely, organically, and it not be, and buy now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
I could be like, oh, I really enjoy, this shirt that I got. They're very comfortable, whatever. But it can be completely. It is not the conversation does not depend on the shirt or whatever it is what we're talking about. Right. It's the experience of whatever it is that is being talked about that gets people into it. Like you talking about the restaurant and like, oh, what's up with that really cool piece of art on the wall in there? And then somebody kind of, I want to see what it is, kind of, maybe I should go check. There's, in other words, more incentive to experience what's being talked about within that conversation. Yeah. Versus just like $9.99. Call now.
What I found fascinating too is when I first started this, like I said, I had that fear of, I don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
So that fear stops you at first from progressing it a little bit more than you normally would do. But then when I started doing it, I met you. Yeah. I met you, and you guys were like, all right, let's collab,
Absolutely.
I think that's huge. So I took that mindset a little bit further. I reached out to a couple friends of mine not mine, that own their own businesses. And I said, hey, listen, I'm going to throw this out for free for now, but you want to be a sponsor? And they were like, oh my God, yeah. And so at the end of this, we'll have our sponsor. But my last podcast, I was able to talk about my friend's about his flooring business.
Yeah.
And he's our sponsor. So he thought that was the best thing since sliced bread, which made me really happy that I was able to support him.
Oh, did you do the sponsors at the end or the beginning?
Well, I should have done it in the beginning, but I also do it at the end.
Okay.
Just to have, and I put a blurb in there. So
who's the sponsor for the show? This one?
Bordeaux and Sons Flooring.
Nice.
Based out of Ludlow, Mass. For all your flooring needs.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so hopefully that will get someone else to, and again, my goal is not to, I would love to be able to make a living off this, but we talked about before, my mindset from the beginning has been, I just want to have fun.
Well, all things come in time. I mean, there's this fantastic and extremely inspirational story. I think Steve, who's the guy who does the Family Feud, Steve Harvey. Had this amazing, it was either him or somebody else. It was actually another inspirational speaker. I forget his name though. And he said, there's this man, he was watering the garden and his neighbor kept noticing, like, what are you doing? You're watering, there's nothing there. And this dude was watering his garden for 5 years. There's a specific type of bamboo that grows somewhere in Asia or something like that, and it does not come out of the ground for 5 years. And in that first week of it sprouting, it grows 30 feet. And that's typically how a lot of what everybody does is you need to spend time and water on what it is that you love, because nothing in this regard. I mean, think about what you do for work, what actually earns you money. Do you think somebody could have got to where you are in 6 months?
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It takes years of experience, or at least a degree in some type of collegiate environment to get there.
Yeah.
And in the same regard, I mean, think about this as your educational time. And it's kind of back to what you were saying is the nervousness. You still have it a little bit. I'm sure we'll all still have it a little bit there in the beginning, just because that's just how it is when you're meeting somebody new. But that process is so healthy, because I was just actually reading something on it. It's called neuroplasticity. It's when you subject yourself to brand new environments, to having to do a new thing, even though maybe it's just the show you're doing once again for the however manyth time.
Yeah.
But the point is that when you're interviewing somebody different, it's not the same, because now you're looking at a completely different human with a completely different life and an entirely different set of questions and whatever else might go into it. So you then develop more connections inside your own mind to be able to take on that process, because I'm sure you can attest to this, because it's hard for me to talk about podcasts. So you've been doing this for 15 years. I just started in May of last year. So I'm assuming you could probably attest to this, that the beginning was so much different than what it is now for you.
Yeah.
For now, it's this is kind of off the cup. You can kind of just get into it. Where before there was probably a lot more hesitation and apprehension and all the things that might have held you back because of your own just self-doubt in the very beginning.
Not to mention the fact that when we started doing Secret Identity, there's 5 other podcasts in the world.
Imagine
so we
that.
had nobody.
Now there's 1 million.
We
There is
had
over that,
nobody
by
to reach out and go, why did we just lose everything in Audacity? Because
Some people have,
Audacity was
3.
brand new.
Yeah.
And all these things were going on. So we didn't
All the
have anybody to
software did
reach
that.
out to about stuff like that. We started our podcast with a laptop and 1 Logitech mic.
Oh wow.
The
Wow.
old platform one with the cylinder microphone like that curved.
Yeah.
And we would put it in the room. It would be closer to my friend Brian because he was softer than I am.
Oh, one of these things like.
So that's what we would do. We would just reach in.
Yeah.
And that's how we would do it. So that part came a long way. Then he's like, I'm going to get a mixing board. And then we got a mixing board. And now we don't, because we record remotely since I moved. It's like everything is just so, you just have to take the challenge. You just got to be ready for it, because I'm not a tech person in the sense that I don't like to work things out. I don't like learning curves. When they say, well, there's a 3-month learning curve, I ain't doing it then.
Yeah.
I need a 30-second learning curve.
Yeah, I know.
Or I need somebody to do it with me until I'm done with it.
Right.
So watching my friend Brian do this for so long gave me the confidence to be able to go out and do the editing side of things, because that was my biggest thing. And
Right.
I remember being like, all right, I edited it. Brian, how do I post it? What do I do? Where do I go?
There's always that one extra step.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And people don't realize that. There's the social media, there's the audio editing, there's the video editing.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God that the one I use kind of, encompasses all that in one shot, so it's a little easier. But you can go down a wormhole, man. Like
engineers. There's people engineer like kind of what you probably do. I mean, you'd be a great person to kind of learn from in that instance, is because you actually take the audio, and edit it. I edit the audio, but like as a whole, like I'll have 3 different tracks that I can each go into and make sure the wavelength and the low pass, the high pass, and then I'll probably, I try to get it. I'll listen to professional podcasts, and I'm also competing against the SM7Bs. Are you familiar with this? Sure. They're just the more common professional podcasting microphones. They're meant for voiceovers and whatnot. So you can kind of mimic how a certain microphone sounds based off that post-production. Though, with all of that, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, some people go in and even physically edit those things. Yeah. So
I had to edit a panel with a band, with Striper, the band I work with, that we did a panel at the recording studio that they were recording out of, and it was 4 mics. I was 2 mics. 2 guys were each sharing a mic, and unfortunately, the 2 louder guys were right on the mic where the 2 quieter guys weren't.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at the levels, and you're looking at a level that's like this high for everybody, except for the other 2 where it's like that, and then you're going in and it's like that. That took forever. That was awful.
Certain software can really be like saving grace with that, because that's what happens sometimes. And I can take their one track, considering they're all being recorded like that one separately. Yep. You can just, this guy was whispering the whole time, and I'll just add on gain to his.
The great thing about this is it'll actually take those 4, so I have an extra mic over there now. So
that's awesome.
So somebody can sit over there off the. So that's another thing I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get people who don't want to be on camera.
Yeah.
Go sit over there. You can be on the podcast. No one's going to know who you are.
Yeah.
And then you can transition over here as you feel more comfortable. You know what I mean? So this will actually take all 4 tracks. If I have 4 tracks, I can do 6 altogether, and it'll actually combine them into one.
Yeah.
So I'm doing less editing. But it sounds like there's 4 different tracks, because you can actually, if I wanted to, I could separate those. It's just more work. But that's the great thing about this, is I've learned to look at things. Just let me know when you got to go. Once we're getting close.
Yep.
I can make this easier on myself, because I'm a one-man band right now until I get some extra help. I do have Matt, my co-host, but he's just starting to get into this too. You know what I mean? So adding the 4th mic on there is, you can the progression's going.
Yeah.
I feel really good now. Like, I'm at a point now where I was actually, I don't know, do you guys go back and watch your own stuff and listen to your own stuff?
I still don't like the sound of my own voice.
Yeah.
So I basically just edit and chop and then put it up and make sure it's good, and then I'm done with it. So.
Yeah, I don't go through everything, but another component of what makes a podcast such a powerful medium is that you can derive many different pieces of information off of like one episode.
Yep.
You could take maybe a really pertinent conversation the 3 of us had, take that out, make it its own. Like, you see how I do clips and stuff like that, and then I'll do maybe even smaller ones for my Instagram.
Yep.
So my process when I'm doing post is I'll get the whole thing, finalize it, export it as one. That's the main episode. And then before I delete the whole project, I'll go in and go, okay, here's 15 minutes of a really great part of the conversation. Take that. Now it's under the clips system, because again, the goal is just to create some type of audience. It doesn't matter where your content is. Yeah. Everybody will know that this is you can't handle the ploof. You know what I mean? That's it. You can't handle the ploof.
Yeah.
I recognize the poster. I recognize the guy. I recognize like the type of conversations or whatever. So all these things sort of carry out as a form of branding, if you want to be sort of boring about it. But the whole point is that you have many opportunities to capture or captivate or educate an audience, about something.
One of the things I want to do is we talk about branding. I want to make sure, I have a friend coming on Monday I went to high school with that owns his own branding company.
Yeah.
So he'll do T-shirts, banners, signs, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
So we're going to sit down before the podcast and we're going to talk about You Can't Handle the Ploof T-shirts.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And start getting people to go out there. I think this is where the fun starts beginning.
Yeah.
Talking about going back and looking at your own podcast, I went back to look at a couple because I get mental. And sound, like we talked about sound before, and you're all about sound.
Yeah. Sound's everything. Yeah, it's important.
It's the video's one thing, but the sound, if it's not right, And I go back and look at some of the older ones that I did that I had to use Audacity on before I had the GarageBand you helped me with, and this. And I want to climb out of my skin listening to it. And I feel bad that anybody has to sit through that.
Yeah, it's well, that's part of the curve. Like, for instance, my first few episodes, I didn't even put a high pass or a low pass filter on. Like it didn't even have the compressor on. Like nothing was on. It was just, oh, these mics sound cool, because when you turn up the monitor high
it sounds fine.
Sounds great. And but when you're listening to it in your car, the bass is so high because there's no low pass that you can barely hear what anyone's talking about. Woo, you're catching every single low frequency there is.
Yeah. And on your end, you've been just entrenched in sound for so long that you must be able to hear things and pick up on that right away, where it takes us a little bit longer.
I mean, I do it with music. Like, I could listen to a song and be like, oh, there was an edit in there. And you shouldn't be able to hear that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the way that, I don't listen to, I guess that's the difference between, me and a lot of other people, where people will listen to music and it's in and out, it's background. I dissect it. I'm listening to every single thing. And my wife and most of my friends and kids hate the fact that I've ruined songs for them. Where in the song Up and Around the Bend by Creedence Clearwater Revival, there's wrong song, Willie and the Poor Boys. So there's a part in the song right before the guitar solo. It goes, dare, 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 dare. And then you hear a little whistle. And everybody went up to John Fogerty for a year. Like, he would see a band in a club play it. And John Fogerty was somebody that would record and never listen to it ever again. And he would go to a club and hear a song, do, Willie and the Poor Boys, and they would do a whistle. And then somebody would go over and go, hey, he'd see another band and they'd do the whistle. And he'd go up and say, why do you do that whistle? And he goes, well, it's part of the song. And what the part of the song is back in the old days when you have to think about using analog, like tape, they were using, or the analog tape, using actual tape.
Yeah.
They would play the song, and then to add something in to create another channel or to clear another track, they would play something else. So it was all on reel to reel. And when the song started to do the other part, it was the winding of the tape that made that whistle.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So I've ruined that song I've not ruined it for you, everybody listening, but I can go through about 100 songs and do that with, because I've heard things and, just a lot of those cool things. But that's
what's the name of the song?
Willie and the Poor Boys.
I'll have to check that out. That's funny.
Yeah.
It's very faint because it doesn't even fit with the song. You can visualize the spinning of the wheel, and the tape now catches.
Yeah.
Wow.
My son's mother just got my son a record player for Christmas.
Perfect.
And
that's cool.
That is actually inspiring me to go out and get a record player. Because
records have really made a comeback.
Yeah, I love that old sound. I can remember listening to Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra.
Supposedly it's still the highest quality.
It is. It's the highest quality.
Is it
the
really?
only thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's better than the only thing that CD has a win on is the surface noise. Because when you have vinyl, you're actually putting the needle on.
And it's physically hitting things.
And you're physically hitting it, where that's the difference between CD is it's a laser, nothing's physically touching it.
Yeah.
But there is nothing purer than vinyl. And
I love that because you can feel it. You know what I mean?
It's the difference between, I always say, because I learned how to play I don't know how to play piano that well, but I like playing piano for what I know. It's very intermediate. But my point is the difference than playing it on a real piano or an electric.
Yeah,
like there's a night and day difference.
Yeah. Are you going to take a commercial break? Because I really got to pee.
You can go.
Yeah.
Me and Michael.
Yeah.
You guys
both got to go.
Well, I'll go after him.
Yeah,
How's
you guys
that?
can switch.
Keep
It's
talking.
easier.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to edit all this stuff out.
No, you don't have to at
I'm
all.
Lazy.
That's perfect.
See, this is the best part of the show because you can
Yeah.
show people.
Yeah. Now we can talk a little shit. Do you think Matt's gonna
Yeah,
be
right.
sitting down?
Yeah.
So going back to how many podcasts there are, there's 41.9 million episodes
Jeez.
published in Apple Podcast as of December 2020.
That's awesome.
So who even knows how many more there are off
Right.
Apple? But that's
Right.
insane.
But it's important not to be discouraged. And I forget which podcast it was on that I was talking about it, but audience is developed in its own organic fashion. So just because there's others who are big out there does not mean you can't be one of them.
Right.
What puts yourself in that arena is obviously time. Because the more you do it, the more you're recognized for doing it, and the more people understand that. I mean, think about it. I was doing the statistics the other day. There's about 10,000 people live in Palmer, about 22,000 people live in Ludlow, however many thousand that live in Springfield.
Yep.
I mean, think about how many, if they all knew you had a podcast, would they subscribe? You know, because you could build so many different audiences off of that. But a huge plus factor is that you're not just putting out content that is 1,000% organically just you. You're putting out content that's 50% you, 50% Joe Schmo. Joe Schmo has relatives and best friends and family and all of that. And those people are gonna be like, no way, I know him or something. And it's an easy way to get people introduced to what you do.
Now, do you find that there's a lot of people that listen to the podcast? Like I throw it on Facebook first.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will watch it, but they don't subscribe.
Yeah, so there's somewhat of a hang up only because not everybody has a YouTube.
Right.
That's definitely a little bit more of an archaic, which kind of scares me to think about, because who uses YouTube like they used to?
Right.
People don't spend their time on YouTube anymore at all. Like I feel like, I'm trying to think. I like going on YouTube to watch things in their entirety. That's what people do.
Right.
But because Facebook has become a medium for content, and same with Instagram, with IGTV, they have Reels now. I mean, you TikTok's almost superfluous, but I mean, TikTok is such a mood that it's still gonna hold its flame. But my point is that having your content everywhere eliminates that altogether.
Right.
So it's so yeah, sharing it there is important. But I mean, what I found really helps as far as, because I can, you can check the analytics. I can see that maybe 200 people listened or watched a podcast, and about 20% of them were subscribed.
Right.
You know, so those type of analytics, there's two ways to dip into them, and I think one is just being consistent. You know, like I do a podcast every Thursday, like every single Thursday.
Yep.
And that's my half of the equation that I always say. What makes something great is that it's 50% professional and equal parts fun.
Yeah.
And so there's certain things that do need to be rigid, just as there's as many things that do not need to be rigid and just fluid and whatever.
Yeah. Now, do you render yours and then put a time on it so it kicks it out at a certain time? Because I notice a lot of times yours comes out in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Oh, 3 a.m. is when I pretty much release.
You preset it?
Yeah, because it's midnight in Cali.
Yep.
So, I mean, it just say Thursday it's up, because it really doesn't matter.
And how many hours do you render that beforehand, before you let it do its thing?
What do you mean?
So, you know what? You can go on YouTube and you can say, I want it to be released at this time. Is that what you do?
Yeah, as soon as I'm done editing it.
Okay, so you're up at that time.
What's that?
Are you up at 12 o'clock at night?
No. I just schedule it.
Yeah,
in other words, it'll be done editing. It'll be already edited like on a Monday, and then I just upload it because it takes a few hours.
Yeah.
And then I set schedule to release on Thursday.
That's what I got to start doing. I'm doing it physically when I get home from work on Friday. Usually about 7 o'clock at night. I'll start because I want to make sure it doesn't interfere with my work, and then I'll send it out. But I definitely want to use that scheduler. That
consistency too plays a huge role in what your podcast is, because it gives some people something to look forward to when they really know. Like I always go every Thursday. Everywhere you look, where you see locals only, it's going to say new episode every Thursday, no matter where you look.
Right.
Whether it's TikTok, whether it's Instagram, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook. So what that does is creates a level of expectation. And that level of expectation can sometimes be leveraged into getting somebody psyched up about it, because it's like, oh, this is like on a time scheme and it's happening. And sometimes I put bonus episodes on Sunday as well. But my point is that I hold myself only to that standard. For everything else, it almost doesn't matter. But for that, it really does, because I just want to make sure that people are getting what I promised.
That's a good idea, because, we talked about standards before, and like for me, trying to upgrade my camera systems and all that, I want to get to a certain standard. Then I feel like I can breathe a little bit, and then have more fun. So the scheduler would definitely help me. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, because then how would anybody know when to tune in, right?
Yeah,
like when you can say, "Hey, tune in every Saturday." At first, people are just like, "Okay, whatever," but when your followers and because again, you have to realize people talk about this. People who listen talk about it and say, hey, yeah, let's listen. It's actually a piece of information I got from your podcast, and then all of a sudden your podcast is part of their at home or wherever conversation, and then somebody might go, oh, I'll have to check that out. Right. The time scheme of it, or when it comes out, becomes really important, because then all of a sudden people catch on, like, oh, every Thursday, all right, or every Sunday, or whenever it is.
Yeah. Now, when's all your stuff come out?
So I usually do the Power Chords podcast it'll be up Sunday, so it's every other Sunday. Then the Radio Eclectic is every other Saturday, and then the Striper one is at least once a month. If it has to be every other month, as long as there's some information, because I don't want to put something out that nobody's going to want to listen to.
Yeah. Part of the problem too with me is that level of expectation of trying to get it out at a certain time, like that pressure.
It just puts a fire under your ass. But what it also
it can help, but it can it can help, but it can hurt too.
Yeah, because we work.
Yeah.
So by the time we get done with work, and I had to make a very concrete line in the sand where I would say that I will not let this podcast get in my way of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really wanted to make sure that my company can trust me to know that I'm not doing this on work time.
Yep.
That I'm taking what they're
well,
paying
you should
me
be
to
able
seriously.
to have your own life. And I think a really important factor in that is that time is made. It's not found. You know what I mean? Like you can do it. And that's kind of back to what I was talking about, like a really great piece of information Gary Vee I had gotten from some video that I came across, and he said, the speed at which you were able to produce is completely objective. That is you cannot, if you could put up a video every day, nobody can argue with that, because it's out every day. Whether it's good or not is subjective, because some people will enjoy it, some people just won't. That's how it's always going to be, but how quickly you do it will always be true.
Right.
So I find it as somewhat of an exercise of discipline, just to kind of, at one time I really messed up a whole video, and I had all the parts, so I put everything back together, because it could take, like, we all know how long it could take to edit a whole podcast. Sure. It could take up to hours. I was able to edit entire podcast in an hour, 1 hour.
Yeah.
2 hours long. And I even have a second camera in there. So there's a switch, and it's not, and unfortunately it's not mechanical. It's a manual switch. I have to edit in my co-host, which I like, because the effect of a camera switching gives more visual content. So it's a little bit more appealing to watch.
Yeah.
So as time goes on, that's probably something you'll get into as well. You can even have a co-host do it. I heard there's even ways to make it so if this microphone's being talked into, it triggers another camera.
Yeah, they do have stuff like that.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously they have that on the big money side of things.
Yes.
Yeah, that is my next thing I was looking into, because
less work.
Again, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be less work, more fun, more content, but without being bogged down by, because I know exactly what you're talking about. When you have to go in and switch angles on a camera, that sucks.
It's a lot of work. It's physical, but I was, like I said, a full conversation. If you really sit down and get to it, and you know your instruments, like I use Final Cut Pro. I just know how to use it very well. I've been using it for years. Bam, 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 bam. And with mild ADHD, I always like to, there's a lot of distractions in this world, but I guess you just have to focus on, what you want to do. Because I have a great friend, shout out to Eddie. He lives in Reno. And he described to me the fun system, as he called it. It's type 2 fun. It's not really that much fun in the moment, but you feel so great once it's done.
Yeah.
And that's kind of type 2. Type 1 fun is fun in the moment. Type 2 fun is fun after. And type 3 fun is not fun at all.
Yeah.
On my Facebook page, because it's right in with that, it says, my favorite part of being an author is being done.
Yeah. It feels
I
so
like
good.
that part of it. I like the sitting at a table and selling books, not the writing it. The writing it drives you nuts.
Yeah.
That must be crazy, writing a whole book. How many times have you done that?
This one is about my 8th book.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been my 8th
Oh my
book,
God.
and I've been working on the Black Sabbath one for about almost a little over a year now. So it's amazing when you get invested in something so much. So for about a month, when it's been with the editor, I've had nothing. Like, I'm like, look at this. I got like hours of the day given to me. What a gift.
Wow.
And now I'm back to doing I'm hoping and assuming it's the final edits.
Yeah.
But that's the part, like this whole process And I'm working with a publisher now that is doing everything. So they're helping me with they're setting it up for me, where before I would be setting up all the formatting. I would be doing all that. Now they're like, you write the book, just give us the book, we'll put it together.
Yeah, always been such a big fan of details, and that's something I can get lost in.
Yeah.
I can imagine a book has a lot of that.
And that's what you have to, the discipline of writing is, I learned it from a thing called NaNoWriMo, where it's every November you start writing, and the end of the goal is to have a 50,000 word script, rough draft of a book. So what that does is it teaches you, because most people everybody does this, where you'll write 5 pages and then you're going to go, I'm going to go back and look at that. And then you start editing it. Now you've spent 6 months on the same 5 pages that you've changed 100 times. And what NaNoWriMo does is it disciplines you to write and finish. Don't look at anything but the word count.
Yeah.
Don't look at anything, but every day you write at least 3,000-4,000 words. Doesn't matter if they're wrong. Doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. Write it. So then that gets you in the mindset of, okay, after a month you're done writing. Now you go back and start doing your edits.
Yeah. So the last podcast
I like that
Matt was on, he had a little bit of a mental block trying to finish his book.
Yeah.
So one of the cool things was, and this is what I love about collabing and stuff like that. So we get done. And he goes, you know what? I want to share something with you guys. I know exactly what I have to do now to finish my book.
Yeah, because this was the other book. This was another one. It's another book that I started about 1.5 years ago. It's an all ages science fiction story, and I had a great premise and a great story, but I didn't have an ending.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
And as we started talking, I'm like, I just got my ending.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Right on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yep. So that was
Yeah.
Like, I walked out of that podcast. That was just on cloud 9. Like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Having these podcasts and these conversations.
Well, genuine moments. You know?
Look what we can do. Yeah.
And marketing, the idea of marketing is, if we're coming up with we're trying to sell this Boba Fett helmet, and you come up with an idea, you throwing something up against the wall. I'm like, that is the stupidest thing that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
But that's going to spur me on to think of something else.
Might stimulate it, yeah.
You're just throwing stuff against the wall until something sticks.
Yep.
And there was so much conversation about aliens and stuff going on where I'm like, I got it. It's done.
Yeah, love it.
Book is done.
That's awesome.
Now the idiot just got to sit down and write it.
Yeah.
All right, boys. It's 12 o'clock. I know you got to get going
Yeah.
soon.
Oh, yeah. That's actually a good call.
Let's wrap this up a little bit. Okay, we just want to recap again So if we approach somebody to be on the podcast again, how can we make them feel more comfortable and what they can expect, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing is that we find them interesting. That's why we're asking, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because you can't be genuine about somebody who maybe you're if what they do, no, not throwing any shade, but yeah, if you don't have any take or experience with what they do or any intrigue or interest, it's what are you going to talk about?
Right. Yep. So the other thing too is that it is a fun environment. We don't have to talk about things that are uncomfortable.
Yep.
Those things are like that. I don't know why people always go to that. Like, we're going to be talking about crazy nonsense stuff. We don't have to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
If the conversation wiggles into that in a weird way, that's fine. That's what normal conversations do. But we don't have to talk about strippers and cocaine and all those kind of things. Those
only 90% of the time. No.
So I want that
Floof after dark.
Yeah.
I just ripped a line right on the desk here. So I think that's important too. So what can you guys give? And we'll start with you. What kind of advice can you give the people out there that when we ask to be on the podcast, what to make them feel more comfortable?
I will say the first thing is, once you do it, you're going to be like, I want to do this again.
Yeah.
It's a very addicting thing. And once you get over the initial fear of the way, like, people see this setup, people see this on TV and wherever they're watching it, and they're going to assume something completely different. Like, no, there's not 50 people back here with scripts. There's nobody. It's a conversation. It is a lot of fun, and you get to be yourself, and you get to talk about what you want to talk about. You're not going to get forced into talking about something else. And if you're nervous, that's good, because that means you're human.
Right.
And it means that you care about something. Because if you don't care, like, oh, I'd love to be on. If I've never done it before, I want to be on. That's the guy or girl I'm worried about. Because they're just going to unload. Like, I've had 45 years of oppression, man. It's coming out.
Yeah.
I don't want that guy.
Sometimes, you never know.
So if there's a little apprehension, that's normal. Everybody that does the shows, you're the host. You're nervous. There's a lot of nerves that go around. It's a lot of fun, and you're going to walk out again going, I can't believe how fast that was, and when am I going to be on again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just passed almost an hour and a half. Look how fast that happened.
Yeah,
you know?
and in addition to that, like I was saying before, there's the mental and then there's the physical aspect of it. And the physical aspect we didn't touch too much on, but just to go over the mental aspect was like knowing who you're going to interview, but motivate them in a sense that you are fully transparent about how enthusiastic you are about what they do.
Right.
Because who wouldn't want to have a conversation with somebody who's enthusiastic about what they do?
Yeah.
If somebody was like totally about what you do, Jeff, and you're like, oh man, you probably think in your head all these things to say. I mean, we all wake up every morning and tell ourselves our life story in some regard.
Sure.
Why not have an opportunity to do it with somebody who's enthusiastic about it? And I think that's the bigger part of getting somebody in, is really emphasizing that and being very colorful about it. And then the other, I mean, the physical aspect, you're very, in other words, what's the word I want to look for? Hospitable, right? You got drinks, you got some water, you made me a coffee when I came in, that was awesome. Those types of things are really important. For me, when somebody's coming on my show, before they come in the day before, I'll go, do you want anything to drink?
Right.
I usually provide it beforehand.
Yeah.
I don't have anything on stock, but I can just grab it.
Sure.
And I do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the game plan with that.
Yeah. So before we go, we have to add to the wheel.
Oh yeah.
Here is your marker, sir.
Oh, man. FMK. Oh.
Yeah. F, Mary, kill. So this can be any topic that you think is interesting.
I got one.
Ride that fine line of.
I'm just gonna put death. I really am. It's something you got to really think about.
That's right.
Because it's one of the things that we all are associated with, but have nothing to say about it besides bad things.
Yeah. No,
Just lost the foot. This is interesting. So,
somebody said to me the other day, when my dad passed away last year, that someone's death is another person's reunion.
There's a lot of honor in dying. There's so much honor in dying, and we in the West do not pay any tribute to it at all.
Yep.
And death, by nature is life, because you need both to have anything. And like light is to dark, like up is to down. And then there's obviously the honor in when you die. You by dying give new way for new new life. And that's
Yep. When my dad died, he died with how he wanted to die.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Which was very
relieving.
Yeah, it was.
Not every some people get drawn out lives of suffering. Who knows? That's a whole other conversation. But I don't know. I feel like there's something good that might come up one of these days. It has nothing to do with the podcast today, but
so one of those ones that sometimes can be very freeing is embarrassing moments.
Good one.
Like you spin that and you come up with your most embarrassing moment. And
ooh, that's a good one.
One that I think about with when I was doing a comic book podcast. I don't know if you guys remember the show Heroes.
Oh yeah.
So I was doing some interviews with some of the people from Heroes, and there was a young girl. Actually, it's like 2 in 1. I can't even remember her name right now. The blonde girl. She was in that country music show.
I'm terrible with
Hayden
names.
Panettiere. Really cute girl, very pretty woman now. But when she was on Heroes, she was young. And I remember interviewing and finding out that her birthday was the same as mine. So the first thing I said to her was, "We have the same birthday." And my podcast partner was like, "Dude, that was like creepy old man." And it got me so flustered and freaked out. But then there was a girl who was a speedster on the show, and she was only on for a couple seasons. But her and her brother wrote a comic, and I interviewed them about the comic book, and I'm interviewing them. And I said, "So what is it like working?" I didn't know they were brother and sister. I thought they were husband and wife.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, "So what's it like working with your husband? Because, man, my wife and I can't even paint a room without wanting to kill each other." And there was like dead silence. And she's like, "We're brother and sister." And I've got some worse moments, but I think that one definitely ties into what we're talking about right now. And that's,
you can't dig yourself out of that hole.
and it's something too where I was absolutely mortified and embarrassed beyond belief.
Yeah.
Like, I am so unprofessional. I can't believe I did that.
I just turned it into a
But
joke.
you know what? It was funny afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take this back. Ugh.
There's some good ones on there.
Yeah, it's gonna get better. How much more do we have? We have
Three
more to go. So we'll have Brett Dumas coming on Monday. So that'll be done. So 2 more guests after that. We're that's gonna be a fun game.
Boom.
And we'll
It's going to be a fun game
so.
for some people.
I love watching people squirm.
Yeah.
So thanks again, guys, for coming on. I think this is gonna
thanks
be
for
really
having me.
helpful
Thanks for having me.
for our guests to understand and what they can expect out of a podcast and some of the benefits that they can get from being on one. So I think that's really important. So podcast number 13 is in the can.
13.5.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you again for Bordeaux and Sons Flooring for sponsoring our podcast today.
Best floors in the business.
Anybody wants to come see my floors upstairs, he did a great job.
Oh, that's
so.
awesome.
those are them?
Yeah.
Those are
Oh, yeah.
nice.
Those are nice.
Those
Holy
are
crap.
nice floors. Yep. So thank you again, and we'll have you guys on again shortly.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Keep in touch.
All right.
Thank you.
Peace.
See ya.